Hi, everybody. David Nour back with another episode of our Intelligent Growth with my business partner, Jenn Cordz. Hello, Jenn.
Hi, Nour. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Good to have you. For our audience, we publish a new episode every Tuesday at noon Eastern. Sometimes Jenn and I just talk about topics that we're observing with our clients, or we research, or we collaborate with partners around. Other times we have guests. We also repurpose these episodes into our podcast. So wherever you consume podcasts, just search for Intelligent Growth and hope you'll subscribe and you'll continue to grow with us. Today's episode is focused on your next acquisition and the tech stack considerations. Specifically, we're going to talk about three perspectives you may be ignoring or not paying as much attention to. And the reason we do this is we're seeing an uptick in M&A. And we're going to talk about what's happening in mergers and acquisitions and where the technology considerations, where the tech stack is particularly important. So, Jenn, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Nour. As some may know, you've got some really great experience with M&A and private equity. And so what are some of the recent trends that you've been watching and observations within the M&A space?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm passionate about not just intelligent growth organically, but also opportunities for inorganic growth. And having spent a number of years around the private equity world, I kind of try to keep my finger on the pulse of what's happening in the space. And a range of factors in the early part of this year, like the financial environment, the recession fears, the inflationary pressures, the Fed raising interest rates. These are not conducive to, opportunities for deal making. And yet we believe, and just to give the audience a glimpse, the data shows that the first quarter of this year, M&A volume was down to about 575 billion versus 1.1 trillion in Q1 of last year. So about half of the deals that got done in the first quarter of previous year got done this year. We do believe that as the Fed pauses interest rate hikes, the opportunities and the market, many markets kind of calm down. The second half of the year, it will increase. The M&A volume opportunities will increase. There are 6 observations in particular. So I'm going to name them and then briefly talk about each for the audience to kind of think about. And whether you are, and by the way, I've long believed there's no such thing as a merger, right? There's always an acquisition. Somebody, even if they announce it as a merger, somebody's buying somebody. So whether you're the acquiring company or you're being acquired, these trends, I think, might be really useful. Number one, by far, and the reason you and I decided to do this is really digital transformation. With the advent of AI adoption, with the advent of, it's one of the biggest trends in the M&A space. Beyond the hype, beyond all the sizzle, who has the stake? Who's actually implementing real AI differentiation and a competitive advantage? And we see greater opportunities. Companies who figure out real applications of AI become really attractive as an acquisition to companies who need that capability. If you think of financial services, if you think of even industrial manufacturing, if you think of almost any business who identifies, again, not just the sizzle, but real opportunities in the space, will be a very attractive acquisition, partnership, M&A type of an environment. M&A volumes. There are some positive influences. Partners who seek acquisition to support their core business. Private equity investors that increase investment activity and shift their focus. These are trends that we see are going to uptick the deal volume. International deals are going to give you a competitive advantage. Do you really want to take the time to build your presence in cross-border opportunities organically, or can I acquire a company who already has EMEA or APAC presence and they're doing really well in that space? Distressed M&A, we believe, is on the rise as a lot of companies restructure, as organizations rethink their market, or they struggle to gain traction in a certain market, they restructure. So those that are in a position to buy see it as a distressed opportunity. By the way, companies that can acquire without financing, you don't have to deal with. It's like a really good example is if you can right now buy a home without having to take a mortgage out, you're not paying those large interest rates. So if you can acquire without financing, you're going to see a competitive advantage. Shareholder activism and ESG, again, environmental, social, and governance objectives. Those are going to be forces for real change. They're forcing companies to really think about how they impact, energy sector. We're seeing, the whole carbon capture and the technologies around that is driving acquisitions. We see a lot of opportunities in small and mid-sized deals as they stabilize and strengthen. So deals that are worth more than $1 billion have dropped. The ones that are less than $1 billion in market value, we see those increasing. We see a lot of those, whether they are looking, if they've got stagnant growth, or they're looking to add additional customers, or Jenn, you and I have seen this. You've got this much in your product portfolio, and acquisition will give you considerably more, becomes very attractive, becomes really insightful. And we're seeing really interesting deals. One of our clients, they'll go unnamed, $500 million in revenue, NASDAQ traded, just acquired a $2 billion in revenue international company. So now they're $2.5 billion. They've just went to multinational. They had to give some concessions, and I'm still not sure we've got the right team leading the organization forward. But those are 6 observations of what we're seeing in the M&A space that might be interest to the audience. So I'm going to turn over to you, or ask you, in those acquisitions and the acquisitions you and I see, we talk to people about, we read about, where does an organization tech stack come into the consideration?
Well, that's a great question, and something that needs to be looked at both pre-sale and post-sale, because pre-sale, you should have some level of due diligence, alignment, just understanding of what the tech stack is and sort of the robustness of it, because the database of whatever organization that you have, that's really sort of the bread and butter, and that's the where you get your leads and where you get your opportunities, and how well that's maintained, and sort of the culture around that data will then give you a really good indication of, is this a data-driven culture, or is this a culture that's going to have to make a vast shift to a different way of doing business if your organization or the acquiring organization is very data-driven and very rigid in how they do things. So looking at it from that perspective, pre-sale is really important. But then post-sale, it also comes in, because that's where the work really begins, because you have to start integrating your systems. A lot of mergers and acquisitions, the assumption is made that the acquiring company just keeps their way of doing things and everybody else adjusts. But when an M&A event happens, that's when you can actually approach improving both businesses by taking the best pieces of the tech stack from each organization and merging them together in a way that really creates this robust, elevated, tech-enabled organization.
Yeah, and we're brought in both on the buy side as well as the sell side. So the buy side often has the upper hand. And as Jenn mentioned, you walk in, you don't need 2 instances of Salesforce. So integrating those becomes a big challenge. You don't need the plethora. What did you tell me our average client used in terms of number of techs in just their marketing, sales, and customer success world?
It's usually anywhere between 70 and 100, average about 80 different technologies.
Okay. So let's just say there's some overlap. You're still going to have a whole lot of different types of technologies. And pre-acquisition, this is a phenomenal time. And we'll talk about the phases in a second, but this is a phenomenal time to really dig into the tech stack. And what we're seeing is a lot of times, yeah, it's a consideration, but not enough of it. Yes, it's something we got to dig into, but we don't dig deep enough. to figure out where the bodies are buried and where we need to really uncover what we don't know. And it's also a really tricky time between the announcement and the actual close, because you cannot legally, SEC rules, you cannot, start to integrate, start to call us. You can't do any of that stuff until a deal is closed. So that quiet period is really the chance to dive deeper. And we're going to talk more about that. So Jenn, what are the biggest tech challenges in M&A events? You and I were talking about this, and I think we came up with a good list.
Yeah, so we came up with 10 challenges to consider when an M&A event happens. And so we'll just go through the list and kind of dive deeper into each one. So the first challenge is actually the systems integration. So that compatibility, the data migration, which systems are we keeping, things like that. The system integration is really important and key to the long-term success of now the future business. And so taking your time and doing the due diligence at that stage is one of the key challenges that not enough people spend time on. The next challenge, number 2, is data integrity and quality. And so every organization, I'm going to say, struggles with data quality and just maintaining a good, healthy database. And so making sure that the now combined teams are aligned on what are the key metrics that we must track and what fields are required, and making sure that we actually have the most complete record for all of our companies, and integrating, to your point, the 2 Salesforce instances, not duplicating fields, making sure that we have the most up-to-date information in the instance as we merge these systems together. So the third point would be cybersecurity. So what are the potential vulnerabilities in the tech stack, and just within merging these different systems? What are the compliance requirements? Maybe the acquiring company has certifications that the acquiree doesn't quite have. How do we get that new team up to speed with these certifications?
Well, one thing you and I've noticed on the cybersecurity front is not turning off people who are no longer with us, or they leave for like months on end. We recently saw someone and we asked them, when did that person leave? Oh, I think about last year, maybe 18 months ago. And they still have the username and access, and all that stuff has never been turned off.
Yes. And to that point, it's also really important when you're looking at those system integrations, whose usernames are actually being used to do some of these integrations, and change that to be a more universal sort of integrator user versus leveraging individual credentials, because that is one of the key reasons why people don't get their access turned off, is because their username was used to integrate some other tool that's key to the whole process. And instead of taking the time to fix that, they just leave it on, which is definitely one of those vulnerabilities. And it creates a ripple effect across all the systems. If you're not careful, you may have just ghost users, but then it also affects your usage as well, which brings me to my point 4 is software licensing and IP. So do we have licensing conflicts? We don't need to keep 2 contracts. How do we merge these contracts? Level of seat usage, permission sets, etc. Do we allow open source, or are we a closed source company? Those sort of rules and things need to be defined when a M&A event happens. And then number 5 would be downtime and business continuity. So making sure that just because you're now merging your systems together, it's not going to affect your prospects or your customers. So making sure that there's operational plans and contingency plans and backups, and you actually have a planned schedule for when you're doing these integrations that's not going to impact day-to-day business. Number 6 is going to be scalability. And so it's that capacity planning, and it's that performance optimization of both the teams, but then also the technologies, and ensuring that you have conversations with the key stakeholders that have owned these technologies and processes historically, and then now finding ways to incorporate what they do and merge those things together is really going to be important. And then establishing to my next point, number 7 is change management, establishing a way to then implement those changes. You've now identified what needs to change. How are we then going to do that and track those changes in a way that, again, doesn't disrupt the business? So then number 8 would be the cost management and spend. We want to make sure that we are spending our resources effectively and making sure that we have budgets for all the departments, that we're leveraging as much of those technologies as we can, and making the investments not only monetarily, but also in the training and enablement and the cross-functional training of the teams as they merge together in those new processes.
On that topic, one of the things we've seen is, again, back to the instance of Salesforce, we've got hundreds of seats that we're not using. Or we've got a tool that somebody bought that they left, and we haven't used it since, but we keep paying the annual fee. And the cost, the spend, and really the smart spend, the intelligent spend becomes a critical one to avoiding that, the budget overruns or the ROI calculations that you just mentioned.
Yes, absolutely. Which then comes to number 9, which is actually vendor relationships. So when an M&A event happens and you do have those 2 instances of Salesforce, the vendor relationship and their understanding and their willingness to work with you to merge the contracts together to find the best solution to move forward, and renegotiating some of those contracts for a win-win, both for the vendor as well as the company, is really going to be important. And then reestablishing those service level agreements, and maybe the acquiring company has a lesser support plan than maybe the company that's being acquired, and which one actually makes sense for the business, because maybe the companies have more resources that are knowledgeable how to manage this, and they don't need the support from the vendor. So just reallocating what that means and defining what that is really going to be something to consider. And then the final point, number 10, is actually legacy systems. To your point, where we've gone into M&A situations where they have 3 tools that nobody's really used, or they were point solutions for some campaign that they did 2 years ago and that they've just remained in the tech stack. That's going to be really important to eliminate those. And then again, in that legacy systems, is creating a new system architecture diagram. So then everybody now understands this is what the new ecosystem looks like, and this is how all the systems are working together, what the data looks like, and how that actually the data moves from one system to another, and how the different teams are impacted. And that also goes back to the training. So the 10 points again is just system integration. Number 2 is data integrity and quality. Number 3 is cybersecurity. 4 is software licensing and IP. 5 would be the downtime and business continuity. 6 is the scalability. 7 is change management. 8 is your cost management and spend. 9 is your vendor relationships, and 10 is taking care of your legacy systems.
For our audience, if you missed any of that, and I want to share a resource as well, we encourage you to come join us in our Nour Forum community. So if you just go to nourgroup.com/forum, Jenn runs a RevOps group, and we'll post that list. We'll post other resources. And what I just wanted to share was, again, we have no ego in authorship. This is a fascinating report on how to find and maximize digital value in any M&A deal. McKinsey published it. It's a little bit dated. It's back from 2020. But what I did appreciate in reading this is they, typical McKinsey, very strong, and they talk about best-in-class integration management office that really looks at master planning and value capture. And as you read through this, as you go through their recommendations, I really like this list, really thinking through, as the acquiring company, what's strategic? What do we leave as is? Where do we merge and retire? What do we deprecate? What do we, retire and write off? So there is a lot of great value in, and we'll put a link. We'll put that download a document in the RevOps group for you, along with a list that Jenn just shared. And we just want to give you resources to kind of think about, resources to bring to bear in your conversations as you go through an event like this, because those tech stack challenges in any acquisition event are critical. And when you run into problems, what we see is, you've peeled back the onion enough, you'll see where you missed one, or where you didn't go deep enough in one, and where it causes kind of challenges downstream. So that's a great list, and we encourage you to go back and think about those.
So yes, and Nour, you've been involved in M&A events several times, and you've identified, and we've talked about in the past, the unique phases that every M&A event goes through. And so where do you feel that the tech stack should be considered as in a company in an M&A goes through these 6 phases?
Love it. So what I'd love to do is let me talk about each of the 6 phases, and then I'd love for you to talk about the tech stack part. So I think the audience would benefit from, if you think about this as a sequence of events, phase 1 is absolutely the pre-acquisition due diligence. So Jenn, what should happen from a tech stack standpoint, say that fast 3 times, in that pre-acquisition due diligence?
So one of the things that we advocate for any sort of organization optimizing their tech stack is really a baseline assessment, because that gives you the holistic foundational view of what all is in your tech stack and how all of those pieces fit together. So that would be number 1. Number 2 would be risk assessment. What technologies do you have? What data do you have? What is the risks related to all of those? And how can you mitigate and de-risk some of that? The next one would be, the third point would be strategic alignment, and how is the technology aligned to our strategic goals? And then as we move into this M&A event, how do they remain aligned to our strategic goals?
Love it. So if you do the pre-acquisition due diligence well, the next step becomes a really critical one in the M&A negotiations.
Yeah, here it would be focusing more on the IP and the licensing, both of your tech stack, but then also your internal processes, and then getting cost estimates of what changes you're planning to potentially make, and then how that would impact the business. And then as you integrate these things together, what does that new cost look like? And then the third one would be tech stack due diligence. This is where you really dive in deeper to data quality, fields, customizations of the various technologies. How do we pull the best from each of the organizations and merge them together? And so that due diligence is really important in the negotiation phase, to know what you're getting into, and having deep conversations with the stakeholders is going to be really key in this phase.
As I mentioned, a lot happens between the announcement and the actual close. The critical phase here is the post-acquisition planning. How do we ensure that we've thought through, we've kind of crossed the T's and dot the I's of, after we close, how do we start to really implement some of these?
Yeah, and in this phase, having a baseline assessment from both of the organizations really helps with then the integration strategy and the formulation of that, because you'll then understand the ripple effects across both the data processes as well as the handoffs between now the various teams. And then from that strategy, you can then plan resource allocation, because the organizations need to keep business moving forward while all these changes are happening. So it's almost creating a sub team that handles the integration of the technologies, as well as another set of people on the same team that are then keeping the continuity of the business.
So now we approach phase 4, which is really, this is when the hard work really begins, which is the actual integration.
Yeah, in this phase, it is executing that strategy that you created in the previous phase. And then throughout the execution of that strategy is really monitoring and optimizing the changes that are being made. Ripping off the Band-Aids and replacing a whole bunch of systems, or just moving everybody over it isn't the way it's going to work. It needs to be an incremental, thoughtful process. And as these changes are implemented, monitor, ask questions. Is this still working? Is it not? And then make those adjustments. And also in this phase of integration is when that retraining, that cross-training really can happen for the employees. So they know this is now what is expected of me, not trying to keep holding on to their old processes and way of doing business. They really start transitioning to that new way of doing business, and that training and enablement is absolutely key in this phase.
A lot of organizations think, okay, we announced it, we did our due diligence, we bought the company, we integrated, we're done. Thanks very much. See ya. and I'm reminded of the military's review of a post-action report. We're deep believers in post-integration review as the next logical phase.
Yeah, in the post-integration review, this is where we can really look at what was working, what isn't working, that performance audit. And so again, looking now again back at that baseline assessment and the new system architecture that we've created and how well we implemented that strategy is how are things working? Are there additional changes that need to be made? And then making a plan to make those additional modifications. And then in this phase also is that cost reconciliation, where we can ensure that we're not just spending duplicate money, but we're also not just spending money to spend money. We're actually being very tight and thoughtful in how we're allocating our budgetary resources.
I read a fascinating report by Bain that said less than a third of all acquisitions are deemed successful within a year after the event, which leads to kind of the last phase of the 6 that we think about, which is ongoing management.
Yes, the ongoing management really comes down to continuing to optimize your tech stack and now thinking for that future scalability from a capabilities, process, and technology standpoint. Because now that the companies have merged together, that product roadmap is going to be different. The needs and outcomes that they're wanting are going to be different. And so ensuring that the alignment continues from a capabilities, process, and tech stack perspective is really important. And so it's modifying the individual roadmaps and creating that long-term path forward. So from that, we have the 6 distinct phases, but now on the other side, you mentioned that a lot of these are not necessarily deemed successful a year out. So what are some of the biggest mistakes and maybe the 3 perspectives to consider in an M&A event?
Yeah. So in terms of mistakes, I'm reminded of Gary Ridge, former CEO and chairman of WD-40. Love his comments of they're not mistakes, they're learning moments. And none of us are born knowing how to do M&A really well. And when you were talking about this topic in particular, tech stack, it adds an additional layer of complexity. So one, as the leader, as hopefully the team leading this, really think about not, I love Amy Edmondson, the Harvard Business School professor, talk about spectrum of failure. And on one level, deviant behavior. People who wake up, decide to screw up, that is absolutely blameworthy. The other end of the spectrum, she actually calls it praiseworthy, because good people, good intents to show up, do their best for whatever reason. They made some, decisions that maybe didn't have the data driven, behind it, or they took a bet. And hopefully they thought it was a prudent bet, but it didn't work out. She actually calls that praiseworthy. And so I don't want to talk about necessarily mistakes as much as learning moments. So we've identified 8. Again, we'll run through the list. And I know we're sharing a lot of lists with you. Again, reinforcing, if you come to nourgroup.com/forum, within our forum, within our community, look for the RevOps group on the left-hand side. Jenn manages that, and we'll post these lists. We'll post this content in there for you to review. It will also be posted in the podcast description that we think will be really helpful to you. So number one, and again, Jenn, I'll talk about the learning moment. It'd be great to have you jump in and give it some context. Let's start with insufficient due diligence. We don't see enough of this.
Yeah, we don't see enough of it, and it is the either the tech stack's overlooked, or it's a byproduct of, yes, we have technologies and they need to be merged together, and so it's not really a concern of the people who are in the conversation. So it's the incomplete assessment, or it's ignoring those security risks of not looking at the number of seats you have, or past employees that may not even be there anymore. How are they being handled? And then also just creating a path forward. So it's that due diligence and asking the hard questions and digging deeper within the tech stack that we see that isn't completely done, or it's done at a surface level and not really actionable.
And the second one, I'm reminded of our audience, you may know I'm an old Eagle Scout, and I was a scout leader for a number of years and drove into the kids that prior preparation prevents poor performance. And, if you went on a backpacking trip and you didn't have the rain gear, or you didn't have the right equipment because you didn't plan, and we really drove that planning, guess what? It's the exact same thing. So if there's poor planning and a lack of a coherent strategy, the integration roadmap shows it. Either it doesn't exist, or there's a lack of a roadmap, or not a believable or viable roadmap. And much more importantly, you're ignoring scalability. You just, again, I gave an example earlier of a $500 million in revenue client buying a $2 billion player in the space. If you're not thinking about that scalability, it's a missed opportunity. So that's a second one that we often see. Jenn, next one.
The third one would be underestimating the complexity and the costs. And so all technologies have some level of complexity. If there's customizations in there, those are things that need to be taken into account. So back to your strategy and planning, that's really important to be incorporated. And then as we're looking at budgets and looking at negotiating contracts and doing relicensing, and maybe there's penalties for early terminations, like ignoring those hidden costs can also be damaging to the future viability, or it reduces the profitability or the speed of profitability when you merge systems together.
Another big learning moment for anybody that's been through a merger or an acquisition event is really ignoring the cultural and organizational factors. So if you disregard the company culture, if you inadequately, train people on the new technology, or show them here's how they can grow personally and professionally by leveraging the technology that's available to them, to not just doing their jobs, but getting more proactive, really anticipating the future needs of the job. There's an opportunity that you're not tapping into the full potential of the culture and the org structure moving forward.
The next one would be neglecting compliance and legal issues. This goes also to the underestimating complexity, understanding what those contracts say and how the systems need to stay in compliance, how you're handling that data and personally identifiable information, and those IP conflicts is really important to make sure that the company can move forward in a cohesive way.
Next one is also one of my favorites, which is poor or non-existent communication. In the absence of information, people will make stuff up. Did I tell you we're going out of business? Where did you come up with that? Well, I haven't seen an update yet, so we must be going out of business. Well, it's just an example of lack of stakeholder communication. And we say stakeholder because from the board to the leadership team of both organizations to the rank and file, you want appropriate communication at the right time. Obviously, higher ups need to be more involved and more engaged. And by the way, everybody's favorite radio station, WIIFM. What's in it for me? Am I going to have a job here? Is my role, is my team kind of protected? How will my job change? Particularly the acquiring company, right? The company you're acquiring, I'm pretty much willing to bet you they've all updated. As soon as you announce it, they're all updating their resumes and they're going to start taking calls from the recruiters. So the more proactively you communicate, the more, and by the way, it's not just internal, it's equally valuable with external. Some of those vendors, some of those partners that are critical to the success of each organization, creating, and Jenn and her team do this really well, creating a portal, creating an environment where based on access privileges they only have access to, but they can come and get the latest and get updates. And by the way, get videos. We work with a client where the executives on, weekly basis, if not a couple of times a week, hey, just want to update you on where we are and how the progress is going and what we're doing. Obviously, we're still in a quiet period, so we need you to keep this confidential, but here's what's going well. Here's some things we're working on. I think that level of communication just keeps everybody on the same page on how's it going, and it leaves out opportunities for misinformation, ambiguity, opaqueness on what's happening. All of those things think about it like germs. If you think about how germs fester, darkness and wetness and not attention. Shine, light into it, clean them up, dry them, you're less likely to get an infection. Same thing with the organization. If you shine a light on it, if you openly communicate, less of a chance of it festering of, do we still have a job? Should we all quit? Should I go find a new job now? And it avoids a lot of those issues.
Well, and also just to add on that, the effective communication also helps establish that culture and reestablish that culture and keep people engaged as you move through this, because they understand where you're going and how you're getting there. Because if they don't know, to your point, they're going to update their resumes and they're going to take their future into their own hands because they don't like that feeling of ambiguity. And so that clear communication ensures that you can actually retain some of that key talent that you're going to need into the future.
And on this, again, we never name names, but I'm disappointed in a high-level technology leader I've known for probably a dozen years who's just gone through, in this case, it really is a merger of three competitors. And I've known this guy for a number of years, and rightfully so. And I don't want the audience to misconstrue my comment here. They're so focused on the minutia. They're so focused on the technology integration that they've abdicated the communication to the corporate communication, corporate PR, HR world. And they're not coming up. They're sharpening the machetes and they're cutting down a lot of trees. And they're not coming up to articulate we're in the right jungle. So now think about it. If I'm deprecating one technology, that whole team that's been working on it is thinking, do I still have a job here? If what I've been working on for years is no longer valued by the company, the joint company moving forward, am I still needed here? Or should I start looking for a job elsewhere? And regrettably, this technology leader is going to lose, if not devalue, some of his relationships inside and outside because they're so focused on the minutia of day to day. And he's going dark months after the closing of a PE firm has come in and has integrated three competitors into a new entity. And this person, this friend that I want to shake some sense into, is completely ignoring internal and external relationships because he's busy with this integration work. And it's just unfortunate because the communication part is so critical.
And that's a great segue into our next point, is overlooking that business continuity. And so they're not creating contingency plans, not looking at redundancies and finding a way to maybe reallocate those resources to a new team or to a new project, because you don't want to lose that talent. And there's a lot of historical knowledge that is with those people. And if they leave, they take that with them. So finding ways to reallocate them to, again, reinforce that they still do provide value and just put them in a different path and help them understand this is where we need you now, and this is where you can provide the most impact, is what everybody wants to know. And so overlooking those business continuity finer details is something that we see pretty consistently.
The last of the 8, again, we don't call them mistakes, we call them learning moments, is lack of post-integration review and optimization. This is a phenomenal time, as Jenn mentioned in the previous topic of if you fail to monitor and optimize, if you ignore, we don't talk about feedback, we talk about feed forward. If you ignore those, particularly around your tech stack, it's a really phenomenally missed opportunity. So to really look at, we had an integration plan. We brought these together. What's worked? What hasn't worked? Why are we not getting the adoption? How do we really amplify and optimize the efficiency, the effectiveness in which we use some of these technologies? How do we learn to better train? You should have no expectation of adoption if you don't plan for, invest in training and development and really putting on pedestal people that are early adopters of the new technology, because that's how it will continue to get better, continue to really extract great value out of that tech integration. Not just business-wise, we're aligned and we just expanded our customer base or our product portfolio, or we acquired some great talent with that acquisition, but now look at how we can really optimize the tech with which we go to market with. And if you ignore that, it's a missed opportunity. So what we've just listed is 8 really biggest learning moments when it comes to your tech stack in an M&A event. If I could focus your 3, and we teased you with 3 considerations, I would say number 1, insufficient due diligence. As Jenn mentioned, we see due diligence. People certainly think about the tech in that integration, merger integration office, not enough of, we don't believe, the tech stack due diligence upfront. Number 2, underestimating the complexity and the cost. Underestimating the complexity and the cost. If you don't dig enough, you're not going to understand, again, what's in the closets, where the dead bodies are buried. What is it going to take to kind of really integrate 2 tech stacks, particularly on the revenue side moving forward? And last but not least, I can't reiterate this enough, poor or the non-existing communication. If you don't communicate the cadence, the frequency, the cadence, the transparency of it, nobody expects any M&A event to be perfect. What they do expect is consistent communication. And you can't be Debbie Downers, right? This is all awful. None of this is working. We're never going to get any. That doesn't bode confidence in anybody. Here's what's going well. Here's full transparency. Our biggest challenges. Here's what we need your help with. If you do that and do that consistently, you really pave the way for people to get it, buy in on it, support it, and feel good about my efforts make a difference. My efforts are going to make this joint organization better at the other end. So we hope this content has been useful to you. Again, the focus has been your next acquisition and the tech stack considerations. Jenn, we've got some great episodes coming up.
We do, and we're excited about them. So we've partnered with a really great company called Versalytics, and they do data visualization and create some really interesting data dashboards. And so we're going to talk about data maturity spectrum and the evolution of those data silos that exist in every organization. And then another episode, we're going to be focusing on change management and fueling your intelligent growth. And then we're on skills gap. What do people need to learn, unlearn, relearn to remain relevant in this changing ecosystem and the changing market? And then we also have a really big announcement that's coming up on October 12th that we're excited to share with everybody. So stay tuned for those.
Can't wait. It's going to be a lot of fun. Again, for our audience, we are live we share a new episode every Tuesday at noon Eastern. Sometimes Jenn and I just share our perspectives, what we're observing in the market, our research, our conversations with customers, partners. Other times we have guests. We have some great guests coming up as well. So we hope you'll join us each Tuesday at noon Eastern, whether you watch the live stream or consume this. We repurpose these episodes into podcasts. So wherever you consume podcasts, just search for Intelligent Growth, and we hope you'll find us and continue to stay tuned for great future episodes. On behalf of my partner, Jenn Cordz, I'm David Nour. This has been the Intelligent Growth. We hope to see you next time. Thanks, everybody. All the best.